I've been alive for over 30 years. I've played a lot of Zelda games. I've eaten a lot of cheese. Some of those things matter more than the others. What matters most, though, is the fact that the best Zelda game I've ever played, I've never beaten. You may say, wait a minute, LP, that doesn't make any sense. And you'd be right. Let me explain. The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom is 2023's sequel to the critically acclaimed Breath of the Wild, 2017's open-world extravaganza that took the Zelda we all had in our minds and flipped it on its head. No dungeons, breakable weapons, the Sheikah Slate? Obviously, Breath of the Wild was a raging success, so when Nintendo announced plans for a sequel, I was practically vomiting with anticipation. And Nintendo delivered. If Breath of the Wild flipped traditional Zelda on its head, Tears of the Kingdom did that too and then glued a tomato to it. Tears of the Kingdom took what Breath of the Wild had established as a huge, expansive, open-world adventure and amplified it, in more ways than one. The most obvious area of expansion was what Tears of the Kingdom did to the Overworld. Here I thought Breath of the Wild's 20-plus square miles was a huge plot of land, and then Tears of the Kingdom comes along and more than doubling it. The addition of the depths alone provided the very same sense of wonder and awe when first visiting, very much like my first descent from the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild. However, instead of bright, open, optimistic, the trademark bellowing of the horn that welcomes you into Hyrule's underworld signifies an area that's dangerous, dark, and devoid of many things taken for granted on the surface. Looking for a shrine? Well, that's too darn bad. But there are light roots, and light roots mean shrines, effectively. It took me way too long to realize that every light root was paired with a shrine above ground in the exact same spot, but once I did, it made shrine hunting feel feasible. With 152 of them to discover, I had expected to need a guide, or some dumb luck, or both even. But light roots proved to be the silver bullet. And speaking of weaponry, Tears of the Kingdom maintained the weapon durability system from its predecessor and built on it. Quite literally, built on it. Yo, dog, I heard you like swords, so I got you a sword for your sword. And another sword that's two swords. Looking for a sword? The possibilities opened up by the fuse mechanic were quite possibly my favorite of the 5 new abilities, filling Link's right arm. Mostly Fuse became a means to an end, an everlasting pursuit of the most violently offensive weapon I could create. But if I wanted to assault my enemies with a literal fish stick, well, that was available to me. And that meant a lot to me. Equally as impactful was the ability to create gosh darn vehicles, mechs, and whatever the heck this thing is with the Ultra Hand ability. Magnesis blew my mind in Breath of the Wild, and now we can manipulate even more than just metallic objects. Truthfully, I don't think this ability gets the appreciation it deserves. I mean, it's the hand of God, grabbing people, gluing them to bananas. What a time to be alive. Emphasis, time, because Recall deserves a mention here too. Also known as Rewind Skadoodle by those in the industry, Recall helped me both solve and avoid puzzles entirely. Benefiting from the game's impressive draw distance, Recall proved to be a viable alternative to base jumping in certain situations. Standard jumping had a new alternative too. Looking to jump on top of something? Tired of climbing? Have you considered swimming up through it? Yes, from the makers of Zora Armor comes the Ascend ability. However, instead of flip-flopping upstream like some sort of possessed salmon, you can rocket up and through? Well, pretty much anything. It immediately changed how I viewed problems with heights, and when available, it was almost always the quickest option. Almost. Furthermore, when it comes to quickness, that was something I initially thought that Ultra Hand lacked. I could assemble a sweet old jalopy, but it would take me a minute. Enter Auto Build. After smacking down Master Koga for the first time, the powers of Bob the Builder coursed through my veins and near instantaneous recreation was at my fingertips. To say that these new abilities shaped my perception of the game would be an understatement. They quite literally are the game. The unique situations that you find yourself in throughout the adventure present themselves not with the hallmark Zelda dungeon trait of my way or the highway, but instead open up every single obstacle to interpretation. Now, whether or not I had the best or most efficient ideas to implement is entirely up for debate, but they worked. And that's what counts. And really, this game works. The game is huge, rich, and nearly everything I wanted as a lifelong Zelda fan. Now, all this praise doesn't mean that the game is without flaw. The temples were a step in the right direction, but still a far cry from the traditional Zelda dungeons that we all crave. I've often thought that if only there were maybe 50 less shrines and the assets, puzzles, and space for them was instead allocated towards expanding the existing dungeons, that many people would be more satisfied. I certainly would be more satisfied than some of the game's rewards often left me feeling. The thrill of the hunt, the journey is the experience, hard work is its own reward, I get all of that. But I am a little bit over having to scratch and claw, exhausting resources, time, and a non-zero amount of my already precious few brain cells to overcome obstacles, only to be rewarded with the Zonai equivalent of a Duracell battery. The game could have benefited mightily from a few more unique items, and while I do fancy myself a big fan of nostalgia, perhaps taking less from Breath of the Wild's amiibo rewards and delivering a few more new weapons and armor sets unique to Tears of the Kingdom, like the glide set, for example, could have gone a long way. All that said, Tears of the Kingdom is still the best Zelda game I've ever played and continue to play. Even considering all I've done in the game, every light route, every shrine, every quest, and more Koroks than I'm comfortable disclosing, I'm still working on it. To this very day, Ganondorf insists on drawing breath. I'll wrap it up soon, but a game this good deserves to be savored. Don't you agree?